Hey guys, so what we're going to be doing, I am going to make an attempt to teach you guys by way of this thing called Zoom. Um, I'm going to go over PowerPoints with you guys. I will have some questions and answers one day. We'll do a whole chat where everybody can be up here or anybody can be up here and we can discuss some stuff, go over some FRQs and stuff like that. So I'm going to teach from this particular location, which is my closet. In my house, the only place that has really good acoustics is my closet. And plus you don't want to hear my kid yell at me and tell me things that you don't need to know. She's a booger picker. You don't need to know that. So anyway, that's what we're going to do. Now, I'm going to work this just like we would a regular class. The only difference is all of your work, we won't have classwork. You will have Google Classroom stuff that you'll have to do. So hopefully we can work this out and you guys will still have your 3, your 4, or your 5 on the AP exam. I want to be here for you guys to make sure that you have every tool possible during this ridiculously weird moment in our history. So you can do well. I want you guys to do well. I tell you that all year. You don't listen to me, but I want you guys to do well. So that's what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to flip the screen to my PowerPoint and give you guys some information. Listen, take notes, whatever it is that you need to do, okay? Okay, there it is. I'm going to get rid of me on there in a minute because that's super duper weird to me to see myself. But I am going to talk so you guys can listen and so on and so forth. Okay, so see you later. All right, so what I have up on the screen right now is my website. I want you guys to be aware that my website is where you're going to find the usual stuff that you need to have to do class. So please make sure you're paying attention to my website, anything I upload or anything like that. So if we look at what I have, here is my website. Notice apgopo2020.weebly.com, and then it says exactly where we are. You go here, hover over units, go down to 3.4 institutions in the judiciary. Everybody can do that. Whoa. That went crazy fast backwards. So anyway, that's where we need to be. Make sure you go to my website, check it out, okay? My website, what I'm doing right now, Google Classroom, super duper important. Okay, so if you scroll down on that same page, remember we do have Khan Academy. It is still there. It is assigned. Please do what you're supposed to do. Easy points, easy way to start when we get back that those points are done, okay? Scroll down a little further and you will have your calendar. It's still there. So you have an idea of what I was planning. Obviously, it's not going to be the same stuff, but you have an idea. And then it has your reading guide. If you lost it or whatever, y'all, I will take your reading guide for a grade when we get back. Don't lose it. Don't forget it. Or if you do lose it, click that, print it out, and it's done. All right. Move down to day 1. Now this is where we need to start. This is where I will start today. That judicial PowerPoint that's right there, that's what we're going to be doing today. You also have all of these other videos that are sitting there. We're going to talk about something called jurisdiction. We're going to talk about sources of law, types of law, and Article 2 in general, just so you have an idea of what Article 2 is. So any of those videos, please listen to them. I'm not going to play them for you guys because you know where they are, but they're there for you, okay? All right, so the judicial branch. This is going to be found in Article 3 of the Constitution. Article 3 of the Constitution is very short. There's not a whole lot of information that they put in Article 3. A lot of it has to do with the fact that they left everything concerning the federal judicial branch to be left up to Congress. So Congress gets to kind of create it how they feel necessary. So it's not very long, doesn't have a whole lot to say. We will talk about it in a few minutes though. Okay, so we're dealing with the judicial branch. The judicial branch is not just the Supreme Court. There are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. One of them is the Chief Justice. There's also thousands of other federal court justices that are part of the judicial branch that we're talking about. We also have a state level. If you remember, go back to our first 2 units where we talked about federalism. We have 2 separate pieces that kind of have to work together here. You have your state judicial branch, and then you have your federal judicial branch. And they kind of sort of have to intertwine in a way through federalism. All right, so Hamilton, he's my fave, you guys know that. Hamilton called it the least dangerous branch. Now we're gonna get into that when we talk about Federalist 78. Some of you guys already got that. The other group, my B-Day, did not get that. I'm still trying to figure out how I'm gonna make sure that Federalist 78 is dealt with, okay? It is your second to last really big document you need to know before we have our last one, which is Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. So I'll figure it out. There's little about the judiciary in the Constitution. Like I said, Article 3 is very short. It does create what is called, they call it a high court. Everything else comes from Congress. The judges have life tenure. What that means is they serve for life. They get appointed. Congress approves them. They're there for life, unless they die, retire, or get impeached. Those are the only 3 ways you can get rid of a judge. Well, a justice. Congress can alter the court's jurisdiction. Now, jurisdiction is this idea of what the court can hear. You've probably heard jurisdiction concerning like police jurisdiction, the area that they have that they're in charge of. Well, jurisdiction for a court is the specific types of cases they can hear. It could be criminal court. It could be civil court. Those 2 courts are very separate. It could be traffic court, drug court, divorce court. So specifically, what that court hears is their jurisdiction. And then the Constitution doesn't say anything about judicial review, which we're going to talk about later in another one of these videos. Judicial review is what the Supreme Court does, but there's nothing about it in the Constitution because they figured it out as they started working. So once we put the judicial branch in play and the Supreme Court in play, they have this moment where they realize this is what we do, judicial review. All right, so our judicial branch is made up of 2 sides. Like I said, it's a dual court system. You have your federal court and you have your state court. Most of the time, they don't have much to do with each other unless you make your way to the top end of the state court. It can eventually make its way into the federal court. Every court can only hear certain types of cases. That goes back to that term, jurisdiction. A drug court will only hear cases concerning drugs. A divorce court will only hear things concerning divorce or custody, possibly. Traffic court, if you run a stop sign, you get stopped by a cop, you run a red light, any of those things, that's traffic court, and you would go to court there. So that's their jurisdiction, the types of cases that they hear. So subject matter and the parties involved. Now the parties, you guys probably watch courtroom dramas like SVU or Law and Order stuff. Well, the subject matter, for the most part, that you guys watch is crime, but the parties involved, that's going to be the 2 sides, okay? So in Article 3 of the Constitution, very little about structure. They leave that up to Congress. Figuring out how many courts, what are the types of courts, all of that is going to be left up to Congress. Now, at the beginning of our country, we do have an act. Remember, an act, a law, a statute, they're all the same thing. They act as law. The Judiciary Act of 1789, that's where the Congress is going to create constitutional courts, okay? So we don't really have this in Article 3 in the Constitution, but it is created by way of an act called the Judiciary Act of 1789. Congress is also going to create all the different types of courts, which we're going to see on a slide in just a second. So this is the court system that we currently have. There's all kinds of weird courts that exist. Military court, so if you've ever heard of like a court-martial, or if somebody does something bad in the military, they go through a different court system than, say, you or I would. Tax court, I'm trying to think of somebody that has been in tax court that you guys might know. If you've ever watched the movie Blade, the guy that plays Blade, his name is Wesley Snipes. He was in tax court for tax evasion for like $5 million. Territorial courts, that's going to be dealing with things that are coming from our U.S. territories like American Samoa or Guam. We have 94 district courts. Courts of District of Columbia. Remember, the District of Columbia is not a state. So it's a separate entity. So it has its own court system. U.S. Court of International Trade. Remember, everything we deal with tends to be about commerce and trade. So we definitely have a court about that. U.S. Claims Court. Then there's this stuff at the bottom that's called appeals courts. Appealing something means that you are not happy with what the judgment was on your case. So you want to appeal to a higher court to look at what happened. And they will then go through all of the paperwork concerning your court case and make a decision, should it move up. At the very top, that's where we have the big stuff. Military Court of Appeals. We have 12 U.S. Court of Appeals, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit, and then the big one, which is our 9 justices of the Supreme Court. So this branch is kind of cool because the executive branch and the legislative branch, they proactively do stuff. They make laws, they execute laws. Y'all, the courts, they don't do anything unless we go to them. Okay, so the courts have to wait for someone to file a complaint, a lawsuit, if you will. So it's kind of neat that they'll sit there and do nothing until we have a problem. We go to them. So the Supreme Court has nothing to do unless somebody has a problem with something concerning a constitutional issue. Otherwise, they're just sitting there being 9 people sitting doing nothing. They have to have us come to them. That is what it means by reactive. They don't come to us. You know, Supreme Court justices are not coming to me saying, did something constitutional happen to you? Or, you know, the traffic court judge in Baton Rouge is not coming to my door saying, did you run a stop sign? No, they're not doing that. We have to go to them with our issues. They're also what's called adversarial. Adversarial is the idea of 2 sides pitted against each other. So anybody that plays sports, anytime you're playing another team, that's your adversary. So in this case, our 2 groups are the 2 parties involved. The defendant, the plaintiff, the 2 people going at it about something. And depending on the type of case and the area in which the case is being tried, jurisdiction is going to be determined through that. So again, reactive, y'all, you got to know that. Adversarial, 2 sides against each other, and then jurisdiction is your subject matter, okay? All right, so now let's talk about jurisdiction specifically. We have what's called original jurisdiction. That is where the case starts, its initial place where it starts. More than 90% of court cases begin and end in their original jurisdiction. So if I run a stop sign, I'm like, oh, I didn't run a stop sign, or there was a bush in the way or something like that. There's a good chance that my court case will end in that same court that I go to, which would be traffic court. It's very rare that it's going to move up. So 90% stays where it started, ends where it started. Now, appellate jurisdiction, that's going to be a court where cases are brought to them on appeal from a lower court. So that's the idea of, I didn't like the end result of my court case. I want to appeal it to a higher group of judges so they can look at it and say, maybe something was done incorrectly. They don't review factual record. They only deal with legal issues, like your Miranda rights. Were your rights read to you when you were arrested? If they weren't, then that's an issue. That means that due process of law did not happen properly. So you can then appeal your case and say, hey, wait a minute, all of this stuff happened, but I was never initially read my rights. So I do have an appeal that can be made to a higher court. Justices and judges are not elected. Federal justices and federal judges are appointed and confirmed, okay? Last year, some of you may remember seeing a couple people dealing with this. You had, in the last couple of years, we had Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, who were both appointed by President Trump and confirmed by the Senate. Remember, we talked about the Senate sometimes acts as a judicial piece. They go through confirmation hearings to make sure that the person is a good pick. When they interpret policymakers within the political institution, so this is the idea that we grab from England. So this idea of appointment and confirmation is from England through what's called common law. Common law, everything is based on what we grabbed from England. Decisions are shaped according to custom. So what have we done before? It's what we will continue doing. So if we have a case that happened 85 years ago, judges today will look back and see, okay, this was similar. What did we do here? Does it apply today in today's society? So that's what common law is. It's what's based off of something called precedent. So former decisions or precedents are going to lead to the doctrine of something called stare decisis, which means to stand on decided cases, meaning looking back and standing on what we did before. So it's kind of this idea of traditionally we've done this, let's keep doing that. So judges are usually going to follow the precedent set by their by their court or higher courts. And then I have an example right there concerning something in Florida. So when the federal Supreme Court decides, though, every single state, every single local authority has to follow that, because it basically becomes law at that point. Supreme Court is the end all be all. You cannot go any higher. Whatever they say is what the entire country has to abide by. So an example would be in 2015, we have a case called Obergefell versus Hodges concerning the gay marriage. And what's going to happen is every state kind of had their own individual state laws concerning gay marriage. And after this case is decided by the Supreme Court, every single state has to follow what the Supreme Court says, which is marriage equality. They use the 14th Amendment, and they basically say, this is a citizenship right. You can marry who you want to marry. Now, constitutional law is kind of interesting because it comes from a bunch of different things. It comes from state and federal constitution, different statutes. Remember, a statute is just a law. Administrative law, case law. So there's all these different places where constitutional law comes from. So every state, you guys should know this, every state has its own constitution. Every state constitution has to abide by whatever is in our federal constitution. And then it also has to make sure it abides by anything concerning what the Supreme Court itself comes up with as new law. This is going to come from the Supremacy Clause. You guys, we have talked about the Supremacy Clause. It is in the Constitution. And I'll probably give points to somebody who can message me and tell me where the Supremacy Clause is in the Constitution. Case law is going to be decisions from courts, their interpretation of different law principles, and they decide what the documents are saying. So a lot of times courts are mainly paperwork. A lot of times what we see on TV is not really what happens on a regular basis in all of the courts. A lot of times it's shuffling of paper, seeing what's going on, what has happened, what should happen, all based on paperwork. Now, there are different types of law and different types of lawsuits. There is criminal law and there is civil law. Now, one day when you guys become lawyers, you will have to get into this really, really deep, but for our purposes, I'm going to kind of skim it so you kind of just have an understanding. Criminal law is probably what most of you understand. And within criminal law, you have certain things that you have to have: the constitutional right to legal representation, also called counsel. That's going to be in our first 10 amendments. Government has the burden to prove whether or not someone is guilty or not. So that's kind of the interesting part about criminal law, is the government is trying to prove somebody is guilty. The defendant is trying to defend themselves through their counsel. If found guilty, the judge determines punishment. So a lot of times you think that the jury is determining that. It's actually the judge. The jury finds guilt or innocence, and then the judge determines punishment. And usually, you know, if it's a murder case or something, that it could be like 20 years to life, which means anything in between. Most cases never go to trial because there's usually some kind of plea bargaining where somebody says, I'm guilty, or, you know, that they plead down to a lower charge. And so instead of first-degree murder, pleading to manslaughter, and then they're like, well, you did that, boom, here's your sentence, and you don't have to go to trial. Now, civil law is super duper complex and weird to me, but it can be anything from traffic accidents, divorce, property disputes. If you've ever heard of something called medical malpractice, it's in civil court as well, and it has its own name. It's called tort. So it's where your body or property is harmed by another through negligence, meaning they screwed up. So for instance, I am going into surgery for my appendix. And while they're taking out my appendix, they drop a scalpel in my, abdomen, and then they sew me up, forget the scalpel. And then weeks, months go by, and I'm like, man, something is seriously wrong. And I end up going back and they do an x-ray and they're like, oh my God, there is a scalpel in this woman. I can then sue that doctor for medical malpractice. Or anytime you see warnings, I think I've told some people this before in class, anytime you see warnings on something, don't put the bag on a kid's head, or put the car seat this way properly into, the grocery buggy. All of that stuff can be something that somebody, if there's not a warning, they can sue that company over. So that's why there's warnings on everything, that sometimes you're like, why would you put a child in that bag? Because someone did and probably sued somebody for it. The complainant, that would be like me with my scalpel stuck in my abdomen, must prove that the other side caused the harm and is liable. So that's kind of what they have to do. Kind of different from the other side, criminal law, where the government has to prove. In this case, I would have to prove that the doctor, is liable for leaving a scalpel inside of me. You do not have the right to counsel in a civil lawsuit. That's kind of a big difference between criminal and civil law. You have to go and find yourself an attorney. So, get Gordon. Usually it's settled before trial for a good chunk of money. Most civil trials are going to be settled through money. Now, interesting example of how this happens. Sometimes criminal cases can become civil cases. So in the case of O.J. Simpson, long time ago, 1994 or 93, something like that. I was like 14 or 15 watching it on the news. He was charged with murder of his, I believe, ex-wife and her friend. He was found not guilty, meaning he was acquitted in criminal court. However, the families of the people that were killed filed a lawsuit in civil court against him called a wrongful death suit. And he had to pay lots and 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 lots of football player money to both of these families, because he was found liable for their deaths in the civil suit. So sometimes criminal and civil they can mesh in a way. Now, the difference between a trial and an appeal, a trial is going to possibly include witnesses. It can be witnesses that they witnessed a crime, witnesses that they're character witnesses saying, I know this person, this is what they're a good guy or whatever. There's evidence that's presented. Again, watch SVU. You'll see all of this happen. The right to a jury for serious crimes or extensive harm in a civil case. So there's extensive harm, that's kind of a weird term, but it can mean a lot of different things. Serious crimes, there is a choice by the defendant for what's called a bench trial or a jury trial. Jury would be like us getting chosen. A bench trial, a judge is in charge of everything. There isn't a jury involved. So that's kind of the stuff that happens within a trial. Now, an appeal is after the ruling. So after we've gone through trial and we're not happy, we don't like the end result of our case. Maybe there was no questioning of witnesses or something like that. And we're like, wait a second, we could have done that and it could have changed the entire, result of this trial. So what you can do is, if you're not happy, you can appeal to the higher court. Now within that court though, there are some things that won't happen. There are no people involved like they are in a trial. So there's no witnesses. There's no jury. Each side is going to submit their paperwork. This is a paperwork court. And they look through everything that happened within the paperwork, because courts record everything. And the panel of judges, they get to decide based off of the paperwork from your trial what to decide. Do they stick with what the decision was in that lower court, or are they going to take it and move on and forward to a higher court with it? So federal judges are kind of cool. They're appointed by the president. However, if we go back to Article 3, there's no list of qualifications for a federal judge, which I find absolutely crazy. So there's no age, there's no education limit, there's no requirement for citizenship, nothing. A president can technically appoint me. with no legal background or anything like that. Now, the Senate has to confirm it, and that's the check that you have on the executive branch right there. If the president chooses me, a lowly teacher, to be on any federal bench, I'm not going to get confirmed for the appointment. The Senate is going to say she doesn't know what she's talking about, so it's not going to happen. And then they do, once they are confirmed, serve for life. That's that life tenure. So you got to die, you got to retire, or get impeached to get removed from your job once you are an appointed federal judge. A lot of times what they will do is they will get appointed to a lower court within the federal system, and then maybe get appointed to the next higher court, and then the next higher court, and things like that, and eventually possibly the Supreme Court. We do have some judges that have moved up in the federal system into the Supreme system. All right, so where do we get all this from? The Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land. There's that supremacy clause, guys. So, does this give the federal courts the ability to determine if an act of Congress or a new law is appropriate or constitutional? This is something that's going to be a big deal once we get the courts rolling after we have a constitution in a United States of America, because you have the supreme law of the land as the Constitution, but the federal court kind of have their hands on the Constitution and can kind of play with it a little bit, which is what's going to be a big controversy even today. Again, we're going to get into that in another one of these videos. This power to review and declare actions of Congress null and void has become known as judicial review. Now, this is going to come from a case in which our first Chief Justice is going to have this end decision within the Supreme Court. And it kind of shows the Supreme Court and the other two branches, this is our job, is judicial review. It's not cut and dry and, drawn out anywhere on the Constitution. So this act that they did through this one case is going to kind of show them, oh, this is our job, judicial review. So that is determining the constitutionality of a law. And it's going to come out of this particular case, Marbury versus Madison. Now, I am not going to go into all the details about Marbury versus Madison. We have this guy right here. This is John Marshall. And then you have Madison and Mr. Marbury. And there's going to be some issues concerning appointments at the change of one president to another. And one guy's going to get kind of mad because he thinks he should have a certain job. Another guy thinks he shouldn't. So what's going to happen is it ends up in the Supreme Court. And what they're going to be dealing with is this thing right here, the Judiciary Act of 1789, which I kind of started talking about that at the very beginning of this. And that's going to be this huge controversy of whether or not determining if something is constitutional or not. It's the first time in our history where the court in 1803 is going to go, this is what we do. We review, we check up on, we interpret what is in the Constitution, and that is called judicial review. So I'm going to stop you guys there. We're going to have I'm going to do a whole other video concerning judicial review, Marbury versus Madison, to kind of help you guys through this. But I'd go ahead and read through it though, see what it's about. It will help you in our next video. So you want a 3, 4, or a 5? This is what this comes down to, you guys. While we're sitting here, I'm sitting in my closet, you're sitting on your couch or on your bed, on your phone or whatever. If you want to do well on this AP test, please do the stuff I'm asking you to do. When we get back to school in April, I'm not going back. I'm not going to say, well, let's review all of the things that we may have missed. Not going to do that. You have to do what I have been telling you to do. I am here to help you get the 3, 4, or 5. College Board is kind of up in the air with how they're going to be doing this test. So I am planning for them to give this test when they have it scheduled, which is May 4th. So I'm going to do my part to help you guys. those of you guys who are going to go through this with me, do the work I ask you to do, you are going to be the ones that are going to be successful on this test. Okay, remember, you guys paid money for this test. Do it. We're not 100% sure about how grading is going to work, but remember, you guys, and I've preached this to you guys all year, it's hanging on my door. Be autonomous learners. Get something out of this for you, not for a grade, for you. I don't want this to be about points. It is about you guys learning, and then eventually on that test demonstrating what you have learned. And this score sticks with you, and it's going to show colleges, you know, potentially that you want to go to, that you are what they want. This score rides around with you. They see that you took an AP test. Okay? Make it yours. Make this for you. Don't make it for a grade. Make it for you, because again, I don't know what's going on with grades right now. I want you to be successful on this test though. So roll with me in Corona Academy for a month and you're going to be better off. I promise. For those of y'all that were interested at the beginning of the year, Albert.io is allowing free access right now. Miss Miller has gotten us free access. I have to set it back up. It will be set up and I will post it as soon as I possibly can. So what you guys need to do, hang out with me on these videos, go through your book at this point, highlight, underline, whatever. If I go over it, make sure you're taking a note of it. There will be a Google Classroom assignment. I'm just doing kind of like one big assignment that you guys can pace yourself on that will go up on Wednesday. I will not go back in April and reteach any of this. I'm going to repeat that. So this stuff is on you guys. And I want you guys to keep in touch. If there is a problem, if you have a family member that gets sick, if you get sick, y'all let me know, because you might not think about it, but the people at school actually do care and want to know that you guys are okay. Sounds weird, I know, but we do. All right. So that's video 1 of Crazy Smorenberg talking about the judicial branch. All right. I'm gonna sign off now. Bye, guys.